Good afternoon and welcome to the Thursday, March 9th, 2023 meeting of the Town of Scarborough Ordinance Committee. Call to order this meeting. Roll call. Liam?
Councillor Seither?
Here.
All right. Councillor Katarina?
Here, I guess.
Councillor McGee?
Here.
All right.
I show three of us here. Thank you very much. Approval for the minutes for February 9th, 2020. Approval of the February 9th, 2023 minutes. Is there a motion to move?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor? Sure, that's unanimous. Thank you. Next item is item number 4, discussion and possible action on the process of updating zoning maps. Refer back to ordinance from town council for further review. So, Autumn, do you want to tee this up for us?
Sure. So this is back. I don't think my mic's on. Before you, I did spend some time with Councilor Clucci and going over the specific language of the ordinance so I could better understand, I think, some of his concerns. There are a few things that have changed and become much more clear, I think, as far as the zoning map being a PDF version and it being clearly written out. And Liam, if you'll click on the next slide for me. And then just go to the next slide. So added some language about the zoning map having an official date on it, and then a signature and a description of the page of the change even. And then, as I mentioned, the PDF being very clear that it's not the online GIS map, it's a static map. And I think we were talking about the same thing, but it was just in the language, making it very clear. Next slide. So this is the zoning map language. And at the bottom, we also added a resolution opportunity. So if something happens to the map, much like we have right now, that the town council could adopt a new map with resolution. So we've included that language at the bottom. So this is how it's laid out as proposed. I think it's pretty clear. Some of it's hard sometimes with the track changes on, but the green language is language that was moved from other sections. And so trying to just keep it in an order where it made the most sense, I think. But this is where we are right now. The official zoning map, it's again, still the GIS department's going to maintain it. The town clerk will attest to its accuracy. It will be kept in the town clerk's office. We will have them for sale in the planning department. But this is the zoning map language that's proposed. So the next slide.
Can I ask
Oh,
a
sure.
quick question? This is what my real estate hat on. Can we keep a copy in the code enforcement office also? And that, should that be?
We are the same office. So yes, planning.
And the reason, and
Yes.
can that be specified in this, or should it be?
We have,
Just because I know, when I'm down there in any town.
sure.
I'm looking at the map and I'm hoping I'm looking at an official map.
Yes,
Looking
we
at
can
it.
add that. I do have that we will offer them for sale.
Well, I
So
don't
like
want to buy
you don't
one.
want to buy one,
No,
but
I
yes,
just wanna
yes,
look
that's
at
the
it.
intention to have them as well, like a smaller.
Right,
version.
okay, cool.
Okay, and then the next slide. For this one, I turned the track changes off just so you could see what it ultimately would look like. We had some requirements in the existing language that basically had application requirements, but not an application per se. And there was no process for who you had to apply to. So we're proposing to add that the application comes through the planning department just for processing, much like subdivision and site plan, and then it goes through the normal process from there. But that's what this ends up looking like. Councilor Clucci had some concerns about fees and applications if it came from council. And so I rearranged the language a little bit to address that as well. So the next slide. This is basically the process slide, language, and it shows you how it comes in through the office from planning and then to approval, and then even to the end if they don't do what they said they were going to do with the site plan approval, how that all can start over again. But basically, the request comes in through the planning department's office. We look at it in as regards to the comp plan and involve long range planning committee if we need to. Then the planning board reviews it for land use. There's public hearing requirements. Then it goes through the town council. If it's approved, the town clerk will let us all know, and then GIS updates it. So very much the same sort of language, just kind of an outline of how it works. And then the next slide. So these are the next steps. So these are the things that have to happen. So it's kind of a twofold process, right? So we're amending the zoning language, but we also need to get to a good map that we're comfortable with. And so we have a workshop scheduled for next Wednesday to go over the 6 to 7 zoning cases that a couple were missed, a couple after further review and really reading minutes and findings were changed sort of on the fly with the motions. So it's not quite as bad, but it's still confusing. And so we'll look at those next Wednesday. And then if that resolution passes, what I've spoken to with our GIS administrator, he's going to actually go back and create an exhibit, if you will, that we can attach to that those 20-year history of what the map looked like, what they were proposing. And so we'll have some consistency. And then he's going to go in and attach all of that paperwork that town clerk helped us find to all of the parcel files in our online GIS. And then he'll make the mapping changes too, once we get the go ahead from council. We also will need to create a zoning change application. We don't currently have an application to do a zoning change. So we'll do one for map and text revisions. And then we'll update our fee schedule. So chapter 311 to add probably a $20 to $30 fee if you want to get a big map, just to have it. And then once we get this done and the language is acceptable, I'll come back with a revision to the language for the shoreland zoning map, because it's exactly the same, but a little different. So we need to make it match. So that's where we are. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Right now, we'll do public comment on this topic, if there's any public comment. Ms. Bristol.
Hello, Allison Bristol, 6 Bayview Avenue. More than a comment, I think mine is more of a question, in that this is also changing who can request a zoning change. And so I'm curious as to why the Zoning Board of Appeals would be added to request the changes. And I'm just going to, this is where I'm coming from. If I go back to the fall, I think it was autumn's first long-range planning committee meeting. And I think the now chair, Peter Farlinger, was introducing himself as being on the ZBA and talking about areas in town that consistently look for variances. And so, you know, he wanted to do something about that, you know, was sort of how he framed it. So the concern there is that, to me, first of all, that's not the ZBA's purpose or purview. Zoning, they're really, you know, to look at cases that come before the ZBA for variances or, you know, different appeals. And the other concern would be that to me, the ZBA should be looking after the zoning, not trying to change the zoning. So I'm not sure why that would be included here. And just a couple of little things. A lot of that is predictability for the people that live in different zones. The other thing, this gives me an opportunity to comment on, we seem to use notices in general circulation papers as a way to notify the public. Nobody gets the print papers anymore that have the
Allison, they
notices.
just discussed, I'm sorry.
You just discussed
They
that?
just discussed that at the state legislature.
Yeah,
this
good.
whole
Well,
new,
yeah. So I think there needs to be, a better way to communicate. And also there's nothing in here that would notify abutters, which I think if, your next door zoning or within 500 feet was changing for an individual or for a developer, then I think that might be something to consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Any other public comment? I'm gonna close public comment, turn it over to the committee for discussion. As far as addressing one of the questions that Allison just had, as far as notification of abutters, does that happen when we do that through the actual request for a zoning change? Not necessarily for the map change, but when a request comes in from someone, is that when abutters get, like, at what point do abutters get notified of potential zoning changes?
They get notified with the application and the public hearing dates. So is that what do you?
That's when the notification for the public
Yes,
happens, not
yes.
necessarily a zoning map change, but the zoning map change is only triggered by a request.
Right, by the request,
And
correct.
then, as another follow-up to that, the comments about the ZBA, I tend to agree that I'm not sure if that should originate, like that, a zoning change shouldn't originate from the ZBA necessarily. It probably should be from an applicant that is, or a landowner. that is
Sure.
making that
And
request.
I'll tell you, the only reason I put them in here is because they, under the zoning ordinance, they're the ones that would decide a dispute for zoning. So that's what I was thinking, that if they decided that a zoning map was made incorrectly or a change needed for it, then they could bring that forward. That's what I was thinking, and that's why I put it in there. Not that they would be doing zoning, I
Not
understand,
proactively, but. it maybe as a
correct,
result
but
of their decision.
reactionary.
So I guess at that point, though, would
finding.
you let the zoning board rule and then maybe the planning office would bring forward the
think
amendment?
That makes sense. Unless
Well,
Brian has something.
there's
to offer.
another situation. I would argue with Ms. Bristol's comments in that the board hears so many variance appeals. If they seem to be congregated in a certain area, that points to a problem with the zoning in that area. For example, Higgins Beach, which I'm sure Allison is very familiar with, we saw 75% of the variances were at Higgins Beach. We knew there was a problem. The historical development there didn't match the zoning that was there. So the zoning board actually proposed that the town do something about it. They didn't know what. They just said, we need to look at the zoning in that area. And at the time, the planning director, Dan Bacon, initiated an activity, I guess, to look at form-based zoning instead of the zoning that we had, and that was what resulted. So I think it's completely and totally appropriate for the zoning board to bring forward a request for a zone change, or at least, point out a problem and say, can the town fix this? So I think in that regard, it's totally appropriate. But no, the zoning board isn't going to come and say, we want to see that change and that change and that change.
Yeah.
They're going to point to a problem.
But which I guess I was just thinking, is it just a better form for us, though, to have the planning department bring forward that change after seeing so many issues in the zoning meetings? You know what I mean? Having just.
Well, I
I
think
know
that
it's
would
kind
be
of-
the normal path. They would write a letter to the planning department and say, here's what we're seeing, and then hand it up. They're not professional,
Sure.
planners, so they probably don't know what the correct path would be, but they want, they can point to that problem and bring it to the planner's attention and say, I think it's time, given the fact that we've heard 90% of our appeals in this area, there's obviously a problem with the zoning there.
It sounds like we could definitely take them off from the initiation, but with the understanding that they're going to continue.
They're gonna just work through the planning department, right?
I think
Or,
that's-
yeah.
I think that's fine.
Or at
Because
least
the intent was not to give them
extra authority.
zoning change authority or anything extra than what they already have. So,
Counselor Seiler, Counselor Katarina, any other questions on this or discussion points?
I just wanted to clarify for the benefit of the public. Could you talk about what is meant by static? I know what it means by static map. What
Sure.
we mean by that, because I think people get confused because they hear that, oh, well, we're gonna send these changes, these updates, fixes, whatever to GIS. And then they think, anyway, if you could
Sure,
explain
sure.
the difference between
Sure.
GIS and then the static map.
So GIS is the server where we keep the data. It's continually being updated and changed, if you will, with roads and data points and whatnot. But so it's sort of a living, moving document. But what we're talking about is taking a snapshot in time, date stamping it, signing it, and having it a PDF. And that will go on our website as a link. And it will be the official zoning map as of whatever date is on that. And right now we have it to where that would occur within 30 days of a zoning change. That could go down if we needed to, probably to around 14. Some other communities do that. That's a possibility. But then that online zoning map where you can go in and move things around, look for things is still existing, but the official zoning map is that static snapshot. And then that's the same paper version that we would have in the offices as well. So,
And the zoning layer would not change.
No.
That's not something that changes.
no.
And I just. Counselor Seiler?
No, I would just say thank you for incorporating council feedback from the meeting the other night. I know that that is not the standard process. And when we sent this to ordinance, out of ordinance to the full council, we knew that that was probably going to be the result. And so I appreciate the incorporation of those changes. I don't have any other language changes or questions. And so I'm ready to move this to the next
Thanks.
step.
Anything further, Counselor Katarina?
No.
All right, I only have one quick question, and I'm not sure if I'm glancing over the area. And it has to do with the language saying the zoning map, this is the official. There was some discussion as to whether or not the vote of the council, like if there is a discrepancy between the two, right? And we have an attorney opinion, a legal opinion somewhere. Tom, help me out here.
Yeah. So, there's a resolution that's contemplated, and that resolution is intentional in terms of the legal instrument or what the council is actually doing. Legal counsel has advised that it's not advisable for the council itself to approve a new map, because in doing so, you may be inadvertently, unexpectedly approving changes that are inaccurate. And the real point here is prior council actions is what rules, regardless of what the maps reflects or doesn't reflect. What matters is what the council has done. And so it's an important nuance to, I think, important for the council to take some public action to direct staff to do this. And we hope to give you confidence following the workshop that we've done, reasonable research to give ourselves comfort that we're presenting to you what we believe is a true and correct reflection of past council actions. But it stops short of the council actually adopting a map.
So, and that's, I think that's where I'm driving at with this question. So one of the new sections, it says the zoning map is hereby incorporated in and made part of this ordinance and shall be the final authority as to the current status of district locations. Where uncertainty exists with respect to district boundaries as shown upon the zoning map, the following rules shall apply. And you get into all this other things. I think it's the phrasing, the zoning map is hereby, was made part of this ordinance and shall be final authority as to the current status of district locations. I think that it's that language I'm struggling with. It's because I think it's referring to the map being the final authority, when really shouldn't it be our votes at the council level?
Autumn, is that really referring to discrepancy of kind of where a boundary is, perhaps?
Well, this is sort of our typical language that I found in other districts or other communities, because it has all of these other requirements, right? So if there's a center line, this is just sort of existing language about I'm not talking very well. district boundary lines going to center lines or where they extend on property lines. And we see that a lot. We'll have little slivers of zoning that is over a zoning, over the parcel line. So, but I think if you're uncomfortable with part of that, we could probably tweak that a bit. I didn't touch this part. I was
just wondering if it needed like some sort of like caveat, which was like the zoning map as created by council, blah, blah, blah,
Right,
is the
right.
official, I don't know.
I understand your concern with it, the way it's written.
But you wanted to read not created by council, like,
What I wanted to just
'Cause
make
it's not
sure that
created.
it's not saying that the map is actually because right here it says to be the final authority. And if there was an error in the map, I know we account for how to deal with that, but I was just saying the zoning map as dictated by council votes or something is the final authority. Do you see what I'm driving at?
By approved zone changes or something like that, I understand. Yeah, there were a number of instances, and there may well be remnants, perhaps some of you recall, but not too long ago, we used to have zoning, particularly along the Route 1 corridor that would not follow property lines. It was essentially 500 feet from the center line of Route 1 on either side.
Right.
So you created this, you had this line that would bisect parcels. And so there was the potential for, well, where does that line actually exist? It's not survey quality. So I think in those sorts of instances, there needs to be a process and arbiter to settle those things. And but I think there is probably some further refinement that can answer that, speak to that question.
Maybe we could get some legal.
I think I'd like to run this one by legal because it sort of is saying it's official, but then it gives you all these outs too. So it's kind of mixing the two. And I think adding the stipulation about the damage, destroyed or lost or difficult to interpret also gives us an out. So I'll just double check if you don't mind. Because I had spoke with Phil yesterday and told him after this, I was going to send this to him to get a legal review to make sure we were all good.
And then from here, it's going to go into council workshop, or is it, we have it reappearing somewhere in the council? This is a quick veer off the road.
Sure.
The
Yeah,
trajectory we just sent it on.
We had proposed that the resolution be on the agenda for action next week. Council
Yeah.
leadership decided against that. So at this point, I think let's spend the time. Let's go back to legal. Let's get this done. So I don't expect any action on your agenda.
I don't
next
think we
week.
were going to take official action. I think this was a pit stop. I think they had this trajectory, and I was like, let's have our cake and eat it too. Send it to ordinance because we're right before you need to go to your next spot, and at least we can weigh in on it real quick.
Yeah, I'm just saying at this point, I'm not going to recommend that we put it on for action next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Council first reading. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, my understanding was we would deal with the map changes sort of separately and they could run parallel, but we could be doing both things.
I think that is that pretty much
Mhm.
the good for the
That
feedback
sounds
on this
good.
topic. Thank you. All right.
That was easy.
That was easy. It's the hard part of the day, right? Next item on tonight's agenda is the discussion on motel hotel conversion. And
Right, we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So this one came back as well. I think that at our last ordinance meeting, this one actually moved on, but it came back, I guess.
I've lost track of it. I see it so many
So
places.
it was moved forward last time, and then it got pushed back. So since there's not a lot has changed, again, just to remind you, this came up last August. It came out of the Housing Alliance group.
And
they-
long range
And Long
planning.
Range has looked at it. Originally, we started with a much broader brush of hotels and motels, but we've narrowed it down to the 5 that are zone B2. So you can go to the next slide. Next slide. So these are our locations and these are the hotels that this would apply to. Staff felt that narrowing it down to these 5 as a starting point was probably a good idea to see how it worked. There's a couple of other zoning districts that technically would already allow multifamily conversions. So this one made the most sense. The next slide talks about the recommendations that came out of the Housing Alliance. Quite a few stipulations that we've incorporated into special exception standards. And those are in your packet as well. One of the big ones that they had recommended was that the GMO doesn't apply. That's come up since even last ordinance committee, I think, in conversations. So that's something that I think probably needs some further discussion.
So
There
that's
was-
part of the reason it bounced back to us, I think.
Yeah, and there was also some discussion about not having another situation that we're dealing with right now with the Comfort Inn. So I did meet with Chief Kenlin and Chief Almquist and went over all the performance standards with them. And really, they both sort of felt that the nature of the requirements were going to prevent that from happening because a lot of these hotels and motels aren't set up right now to even do all of the requirements, the separate rooms and separate self-contained units. And so they really felt that the amount of money that they would spend to do that would prevent that sort of issue. But I also incorporated the 12-month lease
Yeah.
that came out of ordinance last time too. So you can go to the next slide, please. So this is still the language that's proposed for the special exception. So multifamily dwellings converted from lodging uses in existence, and this can be any date, are permitted as a special exception subject to performance standards. And then the next slide just talks about the different performance standards. These are exactly the same that we talked about. This is the special exception process. So there's special exception process performance standards, and then there's conversion performance standards on the next slide. These are all the same. You've got the minimum of 10% renter occupied affordable, 50% overall workforce and renter occupied affordable. So there's a lot of requirements that are built into this in order for it to actually happen. So there's a lot of safety nets, I think, built in. And the next slide highlights the added provision for the 12-month lease agreement. And then I highlighted the rate of growth requirements exemption, because I think that's probably worthy of some additional discussion or input from this group. And that's really, those are the only two things that I think have changed from the last time. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Autumn.
Mhm.
Any members of the public that would like to talk on this item? Ms. Bristol, welcome.
Thank you. Allison Bristol, 6 Bayview Avenue. My only comment is this really needs to be part of the GMO. That at the Council Corner Live, the folks that were there, I think pretty much felt that based on what came before Town Council, that number needed to be reduced. Any affordable workforce housing needed to be part of that number, and no exemptions. So I would think that all of this would need to be, should be folded into that. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Any other public comments? All right, I'll close public comments, turn it over to the committee. April and January.
Since this was my baby since day one, basically. Thank you for all the work you've done on this. I obviously am thrilled and hopefully the council will pass this. I disagree that it shouldn't be exempt from GMO, respectfully so. And the reason I say that is because I think it gives a bit of an added incentive to people to do this. It's the right thing to do. We have issues from an economic viewpoint of places that are, I'll use the word affordable. I know that gets all mixed up for people, you know, affordable. Oh my God, it's those people in Lowing. I don't know. It drives me nuts. But we need places for people who work. The used to be the average Joe, Susie worker who worked in a, you know, hourly working situation. They can't afford to live anywhere around here. So to me, the more we can do to assist our community to become more diverse in that respect, and you know, so employees aren't traveling like they do now, an hour and a half one way to work for whatever the minimum wage is, isn't happening, that we make a dent in that. So that's my appeal for, you know, leaving it exempt from GMO. But other than that, and I do like the 12-month, I agree with that because again, it's a stability. It adds for housing stability. So you don't have this revolving door going around. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks. April, any thoughts?
Couple things, and I don't want to I want to say something in response to Jean Marie's point about the 12-month lease. Do we have, evidence is not the right word, but have you had discussions with public safety as to whether similar situations or similar neighborhoods that enforcing a 12-month lease actually has the intended purpose? Because I feel like there are certain areas of town, and I don't know what the lease restrictions are off the top of my head, if they're, if it's up to the management company or if it's part of an ordinance, but I know that we certainly have parts of town where there is higher turnover than a 12-month lease. And so my concern is that, is that even enforceable, I guess? And so it's something nice to put in an ordinance, but if it's not enforceable, then we're not going to have the desired effect.
Sure, I think you would have to, through the special exception process where they have, one of the requirements is that they have on-site management as well. So I think they would have to go before the ZBA with very standard set of what they're going to do, and perhaps even have some sort of period to where we have, we'd have to probably put some sort of upfront sort of, not a licensing, but a period of time where we make sure that things are working, or if we get a complaint, then we go and ask to see, and we find out that they're in violation of their special exception. So, there's some different ways to go about it. It's not something that's going to be on our daily radar. We're not going to be in the leasing office with them, but I think there are a few things that we could probably put into place to ensure, especially if we see a problem start to arise.
And I know one of the intents of people was also, because you don't want people using these, going in and then use them as VRBOs and DAVs and whatever. So that was the other reason.
Okay, and then my next question is, it's in the memo, but I don't necessarily see that it's reflected in the ordinance language. But it does relate to the GMO and in terms of number of units. And there's a recommendation in the memo that suggests that if the conversion requires obtaining a growth permit for any net units created above the number of rooms in the structure being converted. And so that kind of suggests to me that property owners would be able to build additional units, but then there would be some level of exemption based on how many units were pre-existing within the hotel. And some of the hotels have upwards of, 155 units. And so that starts to feel very large and unmanageable to give that kind of free rein on exemptions. And I'm not sure how this ties into the ordinance language, but that is part of the memo.
It's number 10 on the performance standards.
Okay.
But yes, it was part of their original language. It's all units in the conversion proposal should be exempt, and then any new construction of units or additional units over the original would count towards the rate of growth requirements. So that's where it's at. But yeah, I think that if you decide you want to take that away or change that, that would be addressed as well. And you can look on the PowerPoint. I'm not sure where it's at in your packet, but so we have just under 500 units that this would have, or 500 current rooms rather. Most would probably have to go down just because of the size of the units and obviously supplying their own kitchen and common space for each unit. But you have a substantial amount of units in discussion.
Any more questions? So I think from my point of view, there's been a lot of work just on the draft versions of the GMO that have been circulated. The latest version actually contains a workforce and affordable housing pool. And I think that was one based on some feedback that we've either had from the council or from the public, but also I think the intent was to avoid exemptions at all costs. And these conversions, I think this is a good spot to say that the conversions of these hotel motels would fall under that category where they really have their own dedicated permit pool. 150 over 3 years is in the latest proposal. So,
I wouldn't-
well, I think the full council is going to have to weigh in, but I think that just so
Right.
you're aware, that was
Right.
part of,
Right.
I think, why that other pool was created. Realizing that we do want to accommodate for some of this. I don't know how you feel about having a full out exemption. I suspect that we're not going to solve that here today, that the full council will talk about that aspect to it. But as far as making a recommendation that this move forward to the council, as it, either we can send it as it currently is being proposed, or pending a cleanup change on a couple of tweaking the items. I think the 12 months lease thing that's gonna be tough. I mean, just from my property management experience, the documents of the association, quote unquote, whatever they convert to, the board of directors is really ultimately responsible. So if there's a board of directors in place and they're required to have management, yes, it is reasonable to expect that copies of those leases would be kept on file and maybe ready for inspection, you know. Maybe there's something in the language you could do with that, right? But again, is this,
The way we've handled it in the past, we've actually gone so far, and I could see the ZBA imposing such a requirement because there's professional property management staff overseeing the rental aspects, is to require them to file an annual certified or affidavit to that effect. And of course, we could do further exploration if we have reason to doubt that.
maybe that's the easiest approach here, because you're right, you don't want to create your, you don't want a nightmare
No,
of
you put the-
policing,
Sure.
leases and.
Definitely.
Yeah, you put the responsibility on them just to tell us that you are in compliance, and then more likely than not, Brian or his counterparts would use that provision in the event we become aware of the fact that it's not happening. And so, because it's a land use requirement and a requirement of approval, it gives us much more authority from an enforcement point of view as well.
So
So I feel the same way about this as I did the last time we sent something to the full council. I can appreciate full council is going to have some big opinions in terms of language changes or tweaks. I wouldn't support this as written at first reading for some of the changes that I don't necessarily agree with, but I also don't necessarily think that that's for us as a committee to decide, because we need to send something to the full council.
I think at that point, you would just make an amendment, right?
Right, well, and that's
Make a
right.
Motion to amend.
Well, and we kind of got hung out to dry at the last council meeting
They
for
wouldn't do that
for
last year,
sending
but-
something to full council that wasn't ready for prime time. And so I want to abide by a process that's predictable and, that the full council anticipates, but also it's difficult when it doesn't have committee support moving to council other than just the act of sending it there.
Well, are there things that you would want to see change? What can you bring up now that you want to see?
I mean,
change?
it's really hard because we're in the middle of the GMO discussion too. Because maybe if I understood how the rest of the GMO was going to shake out and what the final draft of that is going to look like, then that might shift my perspective on
What's your
the
biggest
allowance
concern?
of this. I'm really concerned about the number of units that this
Why?
equates to. Because I think if we approve a certain number under the GMO and then we turn around right away and we have an interested party who wants to do a hotel motel conversion, that is like just not in line with what we said to the public we were going to do. And I just want to be as predictable as possible. And if the full council supports a certain number at the GMO and then also knowingly and very transparently says we are also in favor of, a 200 unit apartment conversion for a hotel, that's fine. But I don't want to roll this into a conversation and then be like, oh, and also, by the way,
Well,
we're gonna
ultimately,
tack on this.
ultimately, the council can change anything at any time, to be honest.
Well, that's not very predictable.
Well, life isn't predictable. I mean, that's just the way it goes. We try to make it as predictable as possible. I hear what you're saying. I would like to see this go to council so we can have these conversations
Mhm.
with the reminder that we have two readings, conversations, people can amend, have good thorough discussions on it, but this has been looked at by long range planning. It's been looked at, it's been, I mean, I forget how long it's been around, at least a year anyway. So I'm gonna make the motion that we move it. I might as well make the motion that we move this to council as is.
There's a motion to move this to council as presented.
I'll second.
Discussion. I would only add to the discussion of this that I do feel there's wisdom in waiting for how our GMO shakes out. And I say that only because if we end up with a GMO that has a zero exemption process, then my feelings might change on an item like this. But if we end up with a GMO that does have a built-in exemption process, then I'm also going to have a feeling about how I feel about this, which is maybe that's the path for them, is through an exemption process, not necessarily built into either a pool. So I do have concerns of moving on this before the GMO is in place and understanding
When's
what
the GMO gonna be in place?
we are supposed to be voting on that
First
end of
meeting in
April, right?
Yeah, first meeting, April 7th, I think is first.
So
And
that'll be done and this will be in motion and then we'll know. Then
Well,
you
that's
can
what
amend it.
Well, I think that's what I'm saying is I would recommend moving this for the council to
Yeah.
discuss, except I think we should just keep in mind on the council.
Yes, I don't.
Let's let the
disagree.
GMO play out a little bit longer
Yeah,
and
that's fine.
then this can come. Because I think that impacts maybe some
Yeah,
of
that's
how
fine.
I feel about different sections of it. So, is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor of moving this to the council as presented? 3-0. Yes,
Just point of clarity, to the second meeting in April, not before
I would say probably in May to be safe.
May.
Yeah,
I
let's say
mean,
May.
Yeah, I would
just to
say
be safe.
Counselor Anderson he's gonna work with the agenda.
William's got something to say.
I guess I'm just curious, I mean this sincerely. So I expect that once the GMO, however that's approved or changed or adopted, there's going to be a way that something like this is going to be viewed, right? That's essentially what you're saying. The GMO is going to be adopted with a certain set of regulations. Is there an exemption process? Is there a pool? How this gets, and I expect this is going to be remanded back to the ordinance committee to bring a recommendation based on how the GMO was agreed to.
Quite possible.
Okay.
You're right. But it does, I mean, just for me personally, it does, if there's no exemption built into our GMO, but there's a pool, I'm comfortable with this having to work within the pool structure. If we get rid of that newly proposed affordable housing / workforce housing, if that pool goes away, then is there a pathway for a project like this to come before the council? I think that's good to know. And without full council votes on what that final product looks like, it really does change the way I view this, how this should be handled. Yeah,
But it needs to be worked by more than just us.
the brain trust. I mean, yes.
Is there any urgency to this
No.
so that we have no one that's lying in wait,
No.
waiting for this to be, okay.
Okay, so we'll advise that this waits until May.
Okay, thank you.
Making a note here. You got it. All right. This item number 6 is a discussion on fuel cell technology. And for those of you at home watching, you may remember that we did not get a chance to take this full on at the last ordinance committee meeting. So
I'm not sure if we're working off the same agenda. Item 5
that's
on,
interesting.
so item 4 was the discussion on the zoning maps. Item 5 was intended to be revised chapter 419, post-construction stormwater infrastructure.
I noticed we were out of order on the packet.
Okay.
Just sort of rolled with it.
I did
Okay.
too.
Well, I was I go, well,
I don't,
Okay, well, lost the packet
I
for a
pulled up
second.
the March 3rd ordinance committee agenda that was emailed March 3rd.
okay.
Was there a revision?
Yes.
It's the
Okay.
one that's, you should always look at the one that's posted.
Yeah, it's just the order.
It's just
It's
the
the
order. I
order.
don't think that, so just, I
That's
pulled
all
up the agenda. So I guess the question for the chair is, would we like to review chapter 419 at this point and then go back down to the fuel cell?
Yeah, chapter 419 would be great right now. Sorry
Okay,
for
great.
skipping it, folks. at
Okay.
home, Following along.
All right. Don't mind us.
I'll pull down the website version.
Thank you.
I learned that a long time ago.
Just was going on in the packet.
So I'm sorry. So that's Angela. I believe you're
Yes.
teeing this one off. Great, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Just going with the flow.
I
Um,
appreciate all of you entertaining me this whole time.
And staying out of Autumn's way. Uh-huh. There you go. So I'm gonna have two in a row, if you oblige me and stay in that kind of order. So two ordinance, one is a change to an existing ordinance. One is a brand new ordinance that we're requesting. They're both related to what I'm calling water quality ordinances. Essentially, any development that is under construction and then after development is constructed, how that impacts or our waterways, our natural resources. And that's where these stem from. So starting with our chapter 419, that is an existing ordinance for post-construction stormwater infrastructure management. Big mouthful, totally understand that. It was adopted in 2009, and that was based on a permit. Which I know all three of you are very probably familiar with. Our town is regulated at a regulated community under EPA and is administered by DEP. As a regulated community, we have to meet certain standards and criteria, which is basically in the Clean Water Act and different requirements with every permit that comes up. There's higher levels of criteria that needs to be followed. With this, this ordinance, when it was created in 2009, is really the purpose is for after a development comes through, and they are proposing stormwater facilities in order to treat and contain stormwater from their site. Because in all cases, development is adding flow or the capacity and the velocity of flow that's leaving their site and how they control that. What we were finding in the 80s and 90s with the boom happening with development, these ponds were being constructed and never seen again. And so what DEP and EPA are looking at is saying, we can't let that happen on an annual basis. We need to make sure that we are checking in, that maintenance is happening on these facilities. And of course, we don't have the resources, so we're going to put it on the municipality level to do, which in that respect, we are as the locals, we see it. We are hearing about it from neighbors. So yes, we are the eyes and ears on the ground. So it does make some sense in that respect. So with the new permit that came into place in July of 2022, just last year, it spelled out some criteria that we need to strengthen some of the language in here. And so that's what we are proposing. If you want to go to the next slide. Some proposed revisions is really taking what we thought was would capture everything in 2009, and now we're at 2023. And so it's about better defining that area that's governed by this ordinance. It's now updating where we're looking to the state references and guidance documents, so that all gets updated. There is fee structure language in our current ordinance that is somewhat problematic. And so we're trying to streamline that, make it efficient so that people are actually in compliance, because at this point we do not have compliance. So that's a struggle. And we also are implementing different things that we're finding along the way as kind of lessons learned, kind of adding that in after obviously a decade or more of real life experience. And one of the other things that EPA is stressing is strengthening some language around enforcement and compliance, and really putting that on the town to step up that process. And so I think that pretty much covers it. It's pretty basic for chapter 419, and you'll see the red lines through there. And so if you had any questions, I'm happy to answer anything with that before I go on to 420.
All right. An opportunity for public comment on this item. there's anyone at home or in the audience that would like to speak, please approach the podium. Or raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Do you want to take questions now about this one?
Yeah.
So council discussion, any questions or feedback on this? I'll just say from my experience in the planning board, this stuff is technical,
Yeah.
typically really gets sorted out between engineering, planning, and the developer of a property. There's very little, I think, that the lay people have to do with this. I do consider all of us lay people.
Yeah.
So I'm supportive of the efforts, and I know some of this is being required upon you, but also I also know how hard you work at this topic and the next
Appreciate it.
topic. Yes,
Thank you.
and understanding it. And actually, you do a really good job of educating us lay people on what all of this means, because not everyone understands that Scarborough actually administers, and then this is rare. How many in the state of Maine?
30
It's 30.
regulated
Only
communities.
30 residential
Yeah.
communities actually have that authority. So
Mhm.
they do a nice job maintaining it. I've got really nothing else to add on to what you're recommending.
No, I would say ditto. So,
So I would entertain a
That's helpful
motion.
because we do have a deadline by June 30th to have this implemented, so that's helpful.
So anyone want to make a motion to move this to
I
council
will
with full
move it.
support?
Second.
Any discussion?
no,
All in favor? All right, show that is unanimous. Thank you.
So the next available chapter is chapter 420. And this is a brand new ordinance for erosion and sediment control. This is essentially capturing construction activities. So my office deals with a lot of inspection and oversight during construction. And as you can see from the picture, this is kind of what happens when it's not controlled. When people are trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? You'll see a stream at the bottom. That's what that means. A lot of movement of soils or other pollutants that are entering not only streams, other marsh or wetlands. And so this ordinance was created again as a permit requirement of our MS4 permit. And it really stems from trying to bring the state requirements. There is state requirements for erosion and sediment control, again, down to a local level for enforcement and looking at this because we are the eyes and ears. Code officers are out on a daily basis looking at the building pieces. Our inspectors are out looking at the site, and even police, fire, public works are around town and note things, call my office, call Brian. So there's a lot of eyes around, obviously. So we do have that ability to kind of see things and hopefully get ahead of things. But we can only do so much based on our current requirements. So that's where this comes in and kind of setting that as the local provisions and what we can do for enforcement. So if you go to the next one, it just kind of covers, I know it is a little lengthy. This was something that we worked on collaboratively with our region. I would say we have a working group with town engineers and public works, some public works directors joining in that group from, I guess it goes, well, this one we collaborated with the southern region. So essentially Kittery up to Freeport and then out to Wyndham. We all worked in a collaborative effort to come up with sort of a model ordinance based on the requirements that the state was handing us. So all communities like in our region will be doing the same thing I'm doing, putting through their council. And we just kind of laying out what is essentially required and placing it, you'll see in the future coming as this moves forward, it really impacts a lot of other ordinances. So kudos to Autumn for taking that piece on, because I'm like, okay, by the way, this is going to get planted in all these other ordinances. You'll see probably a package of those that this is going to impact. Essentially anything coming to the planning board, site plans, subdivisions, and those less than really need to have a plan in place. They need an actual physical plan and a narrative showing everything that they are intended to do, what happens in the design process. The designers know what needs to happen. It's putting it on a plan for a contractor to be able to pick up and know what they should be doing or maybe shouldn't be doing. It's all outlined there for them. And then also spelling out what our inspectors have the same regulations, can go out there and say, making sure everybody's in compliance. And then the enforcement piece was another big piece that EPA is really pushing back down at the municipalities, saying you guys really need to step up and go to a higher level with enforcement and make sure everybody's in compliance. And so, again, this is just a matter of trying to keep any kind of pollutants out of our natural resources. And I picked this picture in particular. This is the Downs. I think it's harder to see up on the screen, but there's a definitive line of erosion control around that entire parcel. And on the inside where Liam's pointing at is a wetland. And you can see they're developing completely around it. And so it gets tricky. And so having a real good plan is very important. And that's.
Thank you very much. Any members of the public that would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to close public discussion, turn it over to the committee. Any thoughts or comments on?
No, I think it's well done from what I've read, and needed, because we do need to stay on top of construction. And we've got so many impaired waterways in town. We got the marsh, we've got a lot, so to stay on top of this is critical. So thank you.
Thank you, Jean Marie.
Yeah, no, I would just echo that. I know, speaking of having a lot of eyes and ears, I'm sure. I can think of at least a couple of places that I drive through that are under construction where, in the spring or after it rains, half the roadway is just covered. And if all of that's on the roadway, then it's got to go somewhere. And so this sounds to me like it is long overdue. It will give the municipality the teeth it needs to make sure that those rules are being followed. So I appreciate everybody's work on this.
Thank you, April. I have one question, and it's under the section that says Chapter 500, Appendix C, housekeeping. It says debris and other materials, and it says minimize the exposure of construction debris, building and landscaping materials, trash, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, detergents, sanitary waste, and other materials, precipitation, and stormwater runoff. These materials must be prevented from becoming a pollutant source. So this is during a construction phase, is this correct? And does not apply to necessarily homeowners? Just wanna
No.
make that
Correct.
distinction, because before anyone calls us and says, do I need to put up silt fence around my house before I spray for ants? Just
Don't spray for ants.
Spray for ants. There's one way to look at it too. Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and I guess it'll be, if I go back to applicability, it says it applies to all construction activity within the municipality. So I guess I would think that would cover, that's what makes this applied, and how we would enforce it. I guess if you're saying a homeowner is doing their own construction, is that what you're?
Now they're rebuilding a shed and all of a sudden the grass
Ants
guy
run
comes
around.
flying by, and
I guess I would say it would open us up to if someone is doing their own work on their own property and are filling a wetland or not having anything in place, and it actually has potential to get into a stream, or we do get complaints from neighbors saying there's mud running down the street, those type of things, it gives that ability to be able to say, okay, we need to clean this up, because that would be construction activity. I see that's how that would work. If you think.
yeah, I don't think you guys are
language-
looking for problems. I just wanted to make sure for all of those viewers at home that have read through this thoroughly, that they weren't going to get a citation for treating for an invasive species on their property possibly.
Yeah, and I see it more
Depends
of
on what they
like a
do.
corrective action in that case,
Okay.
kind of following. It's, like you said, if you're doing activity and it has no potential for impacts to the natural resources, then it's really not an issue. It's when it becomes an impact or potential, as you can see it heading, like you said, a slurry of mud heading towards a wetland. You can see that one big rain event that could have an impact. I think if that was pointed out to us, we would talk to the homeowner about it. That's all.
It's really erosion and sedimentation. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily chemical treatment.
Correct. It's erosion, yes,
Sure.
of the soil. Yep.
That was all I have for questions. Is there a motion to? Thank you.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to just motion something.
So move it to council.
To move to council. Any discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Sneak out. Thank you very
And
much.
on- Yes, so on the agenda that most people were following, I believe we are on to fuel cell technology.
We do have Michael McNeely and Peter Whitney are the applicants that brought this to us last fall. And I included their presentation from sustainability last time. I don't know if you got to read that since we didn't get to go over it. But I think maybe we could let them go first because I think they could give you a better explanation about the technology and what they're asking for. And then I can go through the ordinance specifications.
Thanks, Ann.
So Peter and Michael, you both are permitted to talk. If you would like to run your own presentation, I can promote one or both of you to a panelist.
This is Pete Whitney with Bold Coast. I'll just talk. I'm a developer using Bloom's technology at a site in Scarborough. And then I'll let Michael talk to more of the technology itself. And he also has a site, I believe, in Scarborough as well. But yeah, thank you all for having us back on. We're excited about these projects. My site is 2 Cummins Road in Scarborough. It's the Fairfield Hotel out by the mall. It's owned by Geary Hotels out of Mass. I'm a partner with that hotel shop. And so, we thought it'd be a nice addition. There's an opportunity there from a siting perspective. And, we're looking at sort of position these out back by their parking lot. There's some space out there. And, just had some questions on the ordinance originally. But I think as you saw in Michael's original presentation, these are the way the ordinance was written was more or less, I think, designed around, power plants, power generation, smokestacks and fuel deliveries and all that. And I think what we saw is that that's not what a fuel cell technology is. And so we just wanted to share that. And, we think it's a great benefit for the town of Scarborough from a tax perspective, both and a clean technology perspective, really. Even though these use natural gas for an input, it's a non-combusting technology. So it's a great transitional type of technology going away from natural gas fired power plants to non-combusting power plants, in addition to promoting other renewables such as wind and solar. So it's a non-intermittent type of generation, which is, I think, probably its biggest selling point. And so it couples well with other types of renewable fuel type sources. So no, just excited that you guys are taking it up and happy to have a conversation and kind of work through this and see if we can get some fuel cell projects installed there.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. It's a great intro to the tech. My name is Michael McNeely. I'm from Bloom Energy, based out of Somerville, Massachusetts. We do have a project over on Pleasant Hill Road, but I'm going to mostly, talk to the tech at this point, I think. As Peter mentioned earlier, when we met with the sustainability committee, we really wanted to emphasize why we believe this is a good bridge technology for the grid. And so, just a couple of highlight points from that discussion is that this is not a non-combustion technology. There's no flame. And that it currently will plug into the natural gas system. But as you may already be aware, there is some legislation to promote the use of hydrogen as a fuel source in that same network. And so over time, this technology will actually be able to adapt and convert into a hydrogen only tech once that fuel is available. So this is a baseload power resource. It's kind of on 24/7. The goal here is to provide some resiliency and stability to the grid. I'm not going to promise you that we're going to, mitigate all power outages, but we are a resource that I think will help improve reliability. And to that degree, the utility has been really excited about the applications that we've submitted for study and integration to the grid. Really we focus a lot on how we can curb marginal emissions, and that includes, CO2 reductions, of course, and then the fact that we, don't output NOx and SOx like a normal, gas turbine generator would. So we think there's significant value to the community, especially from a resiliency and power reliability point of view. But we also believe that the fact that we're reducing marginal emissions with the grid is a big add to this tech as well. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any specific questions you have. And if you'd like, I'm happy to also pull up some slides.
Thank you very much. Autumn, are you gonna kind of go through any more of this, or are we?
I was just gonna go through the proposed ordinance. If you guys have some slides, maybe with what they look like, that might be helpful because it is a different sort of, I included them last time, but I didn't include them this time. That's why some of the language is included and recommended for changing, because our ordinance requires a self-contained building where it doesn't really seem necessary in this case. And then also requiring some placement on site, being to the rear, the back of the side of the building.
So Michael, you should be able to share your screen if you have a few slides you'd like to show.
Sure. I'm actually going to point to our website, as I think it has a lot of great intel on it. And then, if there's any additional information, I'm happy to pull up some other slides that we presented earlier. So, at a high level, basically, there are these box systems that, in my opinion, are very aesthetically pleasing as far as grid equipment goes. But they come kind of in these normal box shapes. This actually is very close to the size that you would probably see on site. And they actually arrive kind of on these skid-like pallets, essentially. To give you a sense of scale, this project over on the right here is actually over 10x what our actual project will look like. That's actually just going to be one of these rows, essentially. At one of the sites. So let me see if I can pull up a little more detail here. See, all of these are too big. This one is a bit small compared to what we're looking for. So ours would be about 5 times as big as this particular footprint. But as you can see, in this specific demonstration picture, we site these next to Walmart's, Home Depots, all kinds of systems like that, kind of all over the US. So I guess some final notes on numbers. I think both Peter and I are offering projects that are about 2,500 square feet in size, and that kind of includes buffer space around the outside of the project so that we can kind of go in and maintain these boxes. And then of course we'd kind of be open to the other proposed requirements, including some type of a screening.
So our ordinance has a limiting factor of the 200%. And so the small scale utility, I think when it was written, wasn't really taking into account what was happening, and we're not monitoring that. We don't know. So they're obviously going to be putting back more than 200% of their users' consumption into the grid. And so that's not really an issue, but what it becomes more of is an aesthetic issue. And so we added some screening requirements and some location requirements. If this gets approved, their use would be permitted. It's a permitted accessory use, and it would require a site plan for all of these. So the site plan approval would go through the planning board, but this just allows them to get to that next step with the use, because as our ordinance is written right now, the use is not allowed.
Sure. And just to clarify, the 200%, was that purely aesthetical because of the size or
I
what?
think it was based on what we knew at the time that it was written. That's what sustainability sort of, after some discussions, like, that's just kind of what we probably thought was gonna happen. Just weren't. It was in 2012,
Okay.
I think, just some unknowns.
Yeah, just an interesting,
Mhm.
I mean, why would you be upset about somebody generating energy into the
Right,
ground?
and I
but-
think it was maybe about limiting, we were gonna get some huge thing, and that was just a way to limit it, different ways to
Yeah,
go about it.
my recollection is the original notion was an on-site power plant, if you will, to first and foremost primarily provide for the needs of what, you know, what is accessory to. I think there was an allowance that there could be something slightly more than that, but really to guard against. And I think the other limitation of 5 megawatts.
And that one doesn't affect.
That doesn't, okay. Certainly speaks to that same sort of thing, that we want to keep these, as the name suggests, small scale as opposed to
Right.
utility scale.
All right. Did I open this up for public comment? No. Public comment, anyone? All right, thank you, both Peter and Mike and Autumn for the assistance there. We'll turn this over to the council, on the committee for discussion.
All my questions have been answered. Thanks.
Same here.
I've got not a whole lot to say about it, so it looks like a pretty cool technology. I was glad to see it coming along and being used.
The
So-
more, the better.
Right.
The more we diversify.
So is there a motion to send this to the council as presented?
So moved.
Second?
I have a motion, a second, any discussion?
Hmm.
All in favor? So that is unanimous. Thank you very much and good luck, gentlemen.
Thank you both.
Filling out our agenda for your agenda for next week.
I was gonna say, we're building the council's agenda.
The good news is it was very light, so there's room.
Oh, good. And item number 9, discussion on revising outdoor storage definition to address fleet vehicles. Autumn?
Right, so this one's been around for a bit as well. It's been some ongoing discussion. Brian and Karen Martin with Sedco had some discussions about this before I even came on board. It was one of the first things we took to long-range planning, and then it got postponed a bit, but we're finally through the process. It's really about our outdoor storage and fleet vehicles. So outdoor storage right now includes fleet vehicles in a roundabout way, right? Because it requires, if you are parked there for over 24 hours, it's outside storage. So if a company is Monday through Friday and they park their vehicles on Saturday and Sunday, they are in violation of our ordinance. And so Brian worked to really figure out a way to pull that out and to address fleet vehicles separately, and to address outdoor storage separately. So what you have before you is an attempt to do that. So we've addressed the definition of outside storage, and then we've added some requirements for fleet vehicles. When we took this to Long Range Planning Committee, it became a discussion point of how many is too many. And so 4 is the number that we came up with, that you could park in a parking lot, and that would be okay. It would be admissible. But if you went over 4, you would have to go back for site plan approval, and then you would have to really be careful with where you locate those. So if you go to the next slide, so then the next slide, please. So this is the proposal. So the definitions, it's taken out the unregistered vehicles. So you might still have a junk vehicle, and that is outside storage, and that is still included, but it's taken those out of that outside storage definition. And then we've added the language below the parking. So you'll have in any commercial district, outdoor parking or storage of more than 4 is required to be in an area to the side or rear. It has to be screened, and it would have to be, if you had more than that, it would have to go to planning board. And also there's a stipulation that you can't take more than 4 of your parking spaces for it as well. So we're trying to build in some flexibility for existing uses and understanding that this is part of their general business plan to have these vehicles serviced. They're generally gone during the day, so it's not a parking concern. But also understanding that we aesthetically and for neighbors, we don't want the whole parking lot filled with these vehicles on the weekends. So there's a limit of 4. Karen Martin sent this out in one of her newsletters for us last month just to get some feedback. She had some questions about the industrial district, so we added a bit of clarity for that, because outdoor storage is allowed in industrial. So we added a stipulation just to make it very clear that you can have your fleet vehicles in the parking lot now in industrial districts. The other questions really were just kind of, she had a couple questions about is 4 too many or what were we, but not a lot of feedback. So we left it as is, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'll open this up to members of the public. If there's any comments, please raise your hand or approach the podium. Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Turn this over to the council. Any thoughts?
I can't think of a business where there's more than 4 fleet vehicles parked out for people to see. I think 4 is probably an appropriate number. It seems a little arbitrary, but if Karen sought feedback and businesses didn't come screaming to SEDCO saying, what are you guys doing? You're gonna, create some huge obstacle for us, then I think that satisfies that number for me.
Well, and as it's written now, any vehicle parked out there on the weekend is in violation. So it's, I think it's a win-win, really. Gives some
There's enough.
flexibility and.
I drive by at least 5 businesses on my way to work. They're in violation right
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I guess that's what my question lies. Like, what is the motivation to make this change? And is it because we are finding people in violation or receiving complaints about neighbors in a residential area seeing basically commercial activity coming from their neighbor? Like, what is pushing for this?
now. It really isn't in response to any particular situation. I'm not receiving a lot of complaints. In fact, I'm really not receiving except for one situation. But as I explored the one complaint that I got, it occurred to me that we're permitting these uses that at least the business model for today includes off-site service. The use is a permitted use, but we're saying you can't have any of your service vehicles there at this. So that forces someone to find some other place to put their, it doesn't make any sense. Either we need to make those not permitted uses, or we need to allow them some flexibility to perform their business model in the way that they envision. And it kind of goes to, I think April had mentioned earlier, predictability is important. And it's also one of these situations where if I'm a property owner, I have a multi-tenant commercial building, and I'm talking to a prospective tenant, and they come to me and say, is this a permitted use in this district? And I say, yes, but they don't disclose it. Oh, by the way, we do have service vehicles that are
Yeah.
perfect. It sort of prevents me saying, yeah, that's perfectly fine. And then finding out, oh, we've got 4 or 5 vehicles. If they come to us and say, well, here's our plan, we've got 6 vehicles. And then we say, well, you need to go to site plan review and show where you're going to put those 6 vehicles. If they've got 4 or fewer, not a problem. They can, so it gives them a little predictability, and it prevents those oops moments where I said, yeah, you can, that's a permitted use. I just didn't know that you had 4 vehicles or 5, maybe. So it just sort of rectifies, it's not that it's a problem, although it is, because I know there are companies that are in violation, but at the same time, it puts me in a very, I don't want to be selfish, but it puts me in a really hard position where I've got to go to a company who's already, taken up residence at a space where they have no legal place to put their service vehicles. And I mean, it's perfectly fine if the ordinance committee or council wants to shoot it down. I just need to know where this stands.
So I'm trying to just reconcile some of this language here, and it just might be a cleanup thing, but out under definitions, under item 6 definitions, outdoor storage, keeping in an unroofed area any goods, materials, merchandise, or unregistered or uninspected vehicles in the same place for more than 24 hours. I mean, I'm farm vehicles typically go uninspected and unregistered, be it like a farm truck. If it's not gonna leave your property boundaries, would somebody like that be in violation of this?
Not normally, because farming operations aren't a permitted use
In
in the
these
zones
districts.
that we're talking about. That kind of falls into a whole different category.
Just double check. Okay, so
Yeah.
this, because I'm looking at a subsection.
So this is just the
Filled out.
outdoor storage, and outdoor storage is only permitted in light industrial. Only
Industrial.
a few places, industrial. And so what we're doing is taking vehicles, all vehicles were defined as outdoor storage. So we're trying to remove them and treat them differently.
So right above it, so that last paragraph, commercial vehicles shall not be parked or stored with engines, motors, or accessory motors in operation in any residential district. That's just a flat statement in the middle of this paragraph.
That's
Commercial
just
vehicles
part
shall-
of this section. It's just, yeah.
That
it's-
exists now.
That's in existence.
So I'm gonna, I have a commercial vehicle for my business and it goes home with me every night. Am I in violation of rural farm lemming? I mean,
But you're in the RF district.
I am.
And you're allowed in the RF district 2 commercial vehicles.
You're good.
I think it's a language cleanup that maybe I'm looking for, because it just says flat out, the sentence reads, commercial vehicles shall not be parked or stored with engines, motors, or accessory motors in operation in any
Oh.
residential district.
Will you go to the?
It's the last
page.
Yeah,
I think it's just.
it's just the
Last
page of the
language.
packet.
So it's parking or storage for more than one commercial motor vehicles is specifically prohibited as an accessory use in R2, R3, R4, and R4A districts, except as accessory to a farm, truck, garden, or nursery. Parking or storage of more than 2 commercial motor vehicles is specifically prohibited as an accessory use in the RF district, except as accessory to a farm, truck, garden, or nursery. Commercial vehicles shall not be parked or stored with engines, motors, or accessory motors in operation in any residential district. So that is a weird sentence that says your truck can't be running.
Correct. In a rural, a residential
You get
district.
there and
Right.
then you better cut it off, right? Turn it off immediately. And so maybe,
I just, yeah, I think it might just be a language.
do you have any idea of what that language
Well,
was hoping to
I think it's trying to
accomplish long
prevent
ago?
like reefer trucks from running
From-
all night with their generators running.
So maybe
maybe
we
in your
can
yard.
change something.
It's not, it says parked or stored, right? So if you've
Yes.
just started it
It's
to warm
okay.
up in the morning before you go to work, it's not a problem.
But the-
Electricity's off and you're using your
But the word-
electric truck to.
Parked is a
Run your
bit,
house
I see what
now.
you're saying, but yeah.
Maybe we
But
just
we
try to
didn't
clean-
change that. That's just
No.
always been there. So I really
Maybe
don't
we
know.
try to clean
But we
that.
could,
Right.
we can,
I'm just, that's the stuff that like,
What would you,
I think we should
I guess
change it.
I'd like to know, what do you want to see there? Because I don't know what.
well, because it says parked, it implies, I mean, parking, there's no time, right? So we have to add some parking time or storage
Stored,
time,
maybe.
yeah. So you can't park commercial vehicles.
That was
for more
probably somebody
than
who had a neighbor that was
Probably
just,
another proactive sort of change. Um,
but then we could go to the good neighbor ordinance and get them on a noise violation.
noise.
Yeah, I can recall concerns and complaints with diesel trucks, commercial type diesel trucks. The person has to bring it home so they can respond in an emergency fashion. They have to get up and warm that up, and an excessive time sitting in the driveway or next to the house, I suppose, can be bothersome. So I think, I'm not sure if that's where this came from, but.
Yeah,
we've
I'm
had
only
those
guessing,
complaints.
Sounds like it.
But I am being half serious when I say, because one of the things they're using now to advertise these electric trucks is you can use it in electric power outages to electrify your home, so to speak. You can use it as an out, so I assume you have to run it.
Mhm.
We did have a case during COVID where one farm had many orders for their produce
Yeah.
canceled. And they didn't want the produce to spoil, so they had to use a reefer truck just to store it, because
Right.
otherwise that produce would have been going out, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I had a complaint from a neighbor, but I mean, it was COVID, so I didn't I didn't push the issue. I did talk to them and they promised that as soon as they could find markets for their produce, that would go away. So I kind of
I know.
selective enforcement.
Well, sometimes you have to.
We'll see what we can do with it.
Yeah, a little prettier before it gets to council.
A little prettier.
That would be my only feedback.
Okay.
So does anyone else have anything else?
No changes to the proposed.
Okay,
Do you want
Is
staff
there-
to work on that, or are you in?
I'm pretty sure that's pretty easy to square away before they got the council. I would entertain a motion.
The
to-
original drafter, so I could ask them what their intent was.
Is there a motion to move this to council?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Sure, that is unanimous. Thank you. And then I believe we are into last part of the agenda. Next agenda items, apparently. Yeah. So next agenda items, I don't know if anyone wants to bring up anything that should be on the radar, maybe coming our way. That we can think of.
No.
No, I'm sure
I'm
we'll
sure.
open
these
our,
guys
I was
will-
gonna say we'll open our email tomorrow.
You don't want to tackle short-term rentals?
Actually, I
we
sort
do.
of would, but exactly.
Right.
It's such a Pandora's box to
Yeah.
open, and the state's looking at it again because of the whole housing thing. So I'm kind of like, let's let the state come up with something, and then we can blame them.
I think, I mean, it has come up. I've had members of the public ask about it.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen
Oh,
notes from
absolutely.
counselors come through saying, is this going to be on the radar at some point? So it is coming our way. Maybe a good starting point, seeing as Portland and South Portland both have ordinances in place.
That don't work.
Well, I think that's maybe where we start, just being like, what's working,
Cape
what's
has one,
not,
too.
what's a good one.
Cape's got
I didn't know.
Because
Cape-
Yeah, because I had to do some research for plan today, because an agent is advertising, oh, you can use, a in-law apartment over as a short-term rental, and I'm like, no, you can't, not under Cape's ordinances.
Mm.
So
And I did a little door knocking, and I do remember,
yeah, people are
Speaking-
concerned about it.
well, and I thought rightfully so at the time, because I was, don't get me started on personal property rights and private property rights, but they were in a small residential area.
Right.
And what's happened is a neighbor converted it to an Airbnb, and it really kind of
Right.
really,
Oh, yeah.
altered the dynamics of the neighborhood. And so I can sympathize with that
Plus it
person's
feeds the
concern.
housing shortage.
Right. Well,
It really
the
does.
tourism short.
We may,
So anyways, that should be on our radar. We don't need to tackle it tonight.
I'm gonna suggest that we see what happens with the legislature, because they do have that as part of these housing bills that they're currently working on. But yeah, let's keep an eye on it, and perhaps in all your spare time, I know you've got lots of spare time. What are other towns? How are they tackling it? Because it's conundrum.
I would just also, I guess, remind you, a fair amount of our beach communities, many of those folks rely on some level of rental income
But
to.
we're talking about short term, like 1 night, 2 nights.
Well, just to be aware,
What
even
I'm
if
doing, yeah.
Oh,
it gets
I
into a
get it.
week, I think that could potentially be a problem for a lot of folks.
Oh, I get it.
It's definitely nothing that should be rushed through on any
No.
level. So
I think also on our radar, I'll change the subject. Also on our radar will be ordinance suggestions from sustainability that aligns with our council goals. I know that that committee is meeting and working on those. And so I would anticipate that, I think we gave them a June deadline
Good.
to bring something to ordinance. So that's also something for our radar,
Okay.
the work that comes out of that.
LD 2003 will start to come too, probably in April. We were in a meeting today, and I started to sort of think about, we could probably do it in pieces, since it's really 3 different pieces. One piece is pretty easy. So we have the workshop. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
gonna
we have
say,
the
well, I
workshop.
invited the legislators to come to the workshop on April 5th, and I've heard back from 3 of them. for
Okay.
sure Are gonna be there, because I want to put them on the hot seat to some degree, so they can see what we deal with. And then so we can hear from them too. So,
So that may, part of that may be able to come back in April.
Need to start that,
Mhm.
once they change it, it's an effective date. for
July
March,
1.
July 1.
So I think we need to
Yeah.
start.
we aren't in bad shape, though, from what I recall.
I thought wasn't there 1 year moratorium? Did they advance
That was it.
That was
That's
it.
it. We're, okay, and we're
That
back
was
to
it.
July 1.
Now we're back to July
There's
1.
pending legislation in this session, or at least bills proposed to push back another year.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Shouldn't count on that.
Maybe that's what I was reading. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, motion to adjourn from anyone?
Second?
All in favor? Show that is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.